They had chosen a Sunday morning because Sunday mornings still smelled of complacency at the Louvre. Fewer bodies, quieter halls, the kind of lull that eats away at the razor edge of vigilance. What had once been a royal palace, a citadel of crowns and ceremonies, now wore the quiet dignity of a museum, a public treasure house France boasted about, a place that carried the nation's history like armor. For generations it had seemed untouchable. Cameras stitched along the walls, motion sensors hummed inside display cases. Guards walked routes timed to the second. The Louvre ran like a clock. At 9:30 on the morning of October 19th, that clock stopped. The plan was too simple to be cinematic and therefore perfectly believable. A rented lift rolled up against the museum's facade, parked next to a construction site where one would not look twice at a basket hoisted against stone. Men in yellow work jackets climbed into the basket as if they were ordinary tradesmen. They were not. They carried a saw, a blowtorch, a small chainsaw, the tools of a job that would last 7 minutes. They forced a second-floor window open, climbed into the Galerie d'Orléans, the narrow inner hall that keeps what remains of the French crown jewels, and moved with the precision of people who had rehearsed their timing more often than they had slept. The room sat only 250 meters from the Mona Lisa. In the Louvre's inner rings, everything felt safe. Thick glass panes, vibration sensors, motion alarms in corners, and crowds of tourists, a fortress inside a palace, inside a nation's affection. They did not set off dramatic lasers or weave through vaults. They walked straight to 2 cases, unrolled grinders, and began to cut. The grinders tore through reinforced glass like paper. Alarms began to chirp. People later would argue about seconds and response times and whether the museum's protocols were obeyed perfectly or sloppily. In the footage a tourist captured, a handheld, shaky piece of proof released later, one of the thieves leans in toward the case, saw roaring, face hidden by a hood. In less than 7 minutes, the cases were emptied. What the thieves took was not mere ornamentation. 9 jewels, a tiara, a brooch, a crown associated with Empress Eugenie, the consort of Napoleon III, and other ceremonial pieces vanished. They fled exactly as they had arrived, back through the window, down the lift, and into 2 waiting scooters. One crown, however, did not make it. In the chaos it was dropped or discarded and later was found in a nearby alley, broken and abandoned on the cobbles. A 19th century relic ruined on the ground like a confession. Inside, staff moved fast. Alarms bled into an immediate museum evacuation. Visitors who had come to see the Mona Lisa were swept from the wings and herded out past statues and tapestries they would not forget. Security locked down the galleries, avoiding a violent confrontation. The police sealed doors. Forensics lifted prints from the lift controls, and surveillance pulled in footage from interior corridors and the streets around the museum. The lift truck itself would turn out to be a puzzle piece. Rented 9 days earlier under a false name, the vehicle later hijacked at the delivery point by 2 masked men, then repainted and given a fake plate. The pattern read like the work of professionals. They had exploited a construction site as cover, chosen a quiet hour, and used ordinary tools to do extraordinary harm. They rode south on their scooters, a small, fast convoy toward the highway, and whatever choices and consequences lay beyond Paris. In the days after, investigators suggested the thieves faced 3 cold, ugly options: melt down the gold, break and recut the stones, or attempt to move the pieces intact through a shadowy market with no mercy for provenance. 800 million euros were said to be at stake, a staggering figure that made every jewelry dealer and insurer listen harder. This was not just theft, it was an attack at the heart of a national story.
President Macron called the raid an attack on our history.
Jordan Bardella called it an intolerable humiliation, and Marine Le Pen pronounced it a wound to the French soul.
Their words ricocheted through a Paris already unsettled. Since September, the city had seen raids on other museums, the Natural History Museum and the Museum of President Jacques Chirac among them. And the pressure on authorities was suddenly more than professional. It was political. Forensics, CCTV, and the videos shot by stunned tourists became the public's evidence. The thieves had left traces: a yellow vest, the lift, 2 abandoned scooters. But in the end, what the country feared most was less about fingerprints than fate. Famous pieces cannot long survive intact in the hands of those who steal them. Within the first week, there was hope that specialists might recover whole items and repair what had been ravaged. After the 1-week mark, experts warned, the trail would likely turn cold as metal and stone were transformed into unrecognizable wealth. There is a lineage to such audacity. The Louvre was not immune to history's embarrassments. In 1911, Vincenzo Peruggia, a handyman nobody expected, had stolen the Mona Lisa and hidden her away for 2 years, turning a painting into a global obsession. That episode hardened attitudes and built more layers of security. Yet on October 19th, with grinders and scooters and a rented lift, an organized crew proved how fragile even the most fortified stories could be. When the sun finally sank on that day, Paris was left with empty cases and a damaged crown in a back alley, and more questions than answers. The museum doors would reopen. The halls would pulse again with tourists and schoolchildren and the slow, careful guardianship of art. But somewhere, for a handful of minutes, a small team had slipped past the armor of a nation's pride and shown that even the most impregnable places can be breached. Not with fireworks and spectacle, but with the cold, efficient mathematics of planning, timing, and the ruthlessness to act while the world slept.